The video game industry has always been one of the most trustful and transparent industries. For some unknown reason, most video games today have a higher chance of not working on release, and it's been a more common occurrence in the past decade alone.
I'll catch up with you.
The main reason being that games keep growing larger and larger in scale, with games now taking years to develop, having hundreds of developers from multiple different studios working on a single game, and budgets inflating to the millions. It's only natural that some games end up as screwed up as they are. Luckily, games can now be updated to fix all their glaring issues, meaning most people will often forgive a game for how terrible it was during its launch, some not even knowing there was ever a problem to begin with. Every game is not immune to the odd glitch here or there, but there are some games that are released in such a broken state that it becomes a spectacle to behold, like a never-ending car crash that you can't keep your eyes off of because it keeps getting worse. So I want to recount a few stories of such events, because those who don't remember the history are bound to fail their history final tomorrow. First, I want to talk about everyone's favorite developers, Bethesda, who are synonymous with buggy and broken releases. Now, it's no secret that Bethesda has been using the same game engine since 2003, giving it only a few tweaks here and there to make their games mostly playable on modern hardware, with amusing results. This has resulted in a lot of their games having the trademark Bethesda feel, or in layman's terms, being buggy and glitchy beyond belief.
I read on the internet that our games have had a few bugs.
Despite this, the gaming community, TM, seem to largely forgive their buggy-ass games, stating that most of these quirks are part of the Bethesda experience, TM, which is how they were able to get away with how broken most of their games still are. Seriously, it's not uncommon to run into a glitch or a bug while playing any one of their games, even after they've been patched into oblivion, TM. But one game finally made people realize that maybe these game-breaking bugs are probably not a quirky feature, but a major flaw that keeps getting worse and worse with each new release. I'm of course talking about every Bethesda game, but we'll be focusing on the show that was Fallout 76. A game so unbelievably broken, there were multiple videos just trying to dissect everything that went wrong with it. This game was a true celebration, not because it was good, but rather because anything that could have gone wrong with it did go wrong, and then some. Fallout 76 is a break from traditional Fallout games since it was the first game in the series to be a multiplayer online game themed experience. And with a series as buggy as Fallout, adding more players to that equation quickly led to disaster. To try and describe every single thing that went wrong with it will be a fool's errand since we'll be here all day just trying to describe them all. One of the aforementioned videos is nearly 3 hours of just documenting every known bug in the game. It's that bad. So let's just focus on some of the highlights, such as if you were to launch multiple nukes at once, which is one of the main new features of the game mind you, the server would crash. Or how the game repeated a lot of the same glitches as Fallout 4, but to the extreme. The game was also incredibly unstable with multiple glitches that could occur at any time. But the worst part of the game was that it was completely void of content, another staple of modern day releases. The game launched with no NPCs, so the only way for you to do things in the world is to go talk to robots, look up at terminals, and listen to holotapes. If they didn't glitch out, that is. The game's excuse at the time was that the world was supposed to be filled up with other players who were meant to replace the NPCs of the game, but one of the main selling points of any Fallout game is learning about the characters and how they build upon the world of Wasteland, so taking them out kinda makes the game feel especially empty. The exclusion of NPCs was a baffling choice, and Bethesda thought so too, making an announcement that they would soon bring back NPCs in a future game update, stating that they realized their mistake. Again, this is just the surface level of this game's disastrous launch. Let's not forget how every time this game was patched, a new batch of problems would arise, or how many people tried to refund this game at once, causing the Bethesda store to shut down for the amount of people trying to do it at the same time. There really is just so much that went wrong with this game, and if you want a more in-depth breakdown of all the craziness, check out these videos on screen as they do an amazing job of recapping how bad the release really was. The game is better now from what I gathered, but no one's actually managed to play it because nobody plays Fallout 76. Oh look, another Fallout game. This video could just be filled with Bethesda properties, but let's only talk about these two games specifically since they truly were some of the worst launches out of the lineup. Plus, this game was developed by Obsidian, and the story behind this game's development has a lot more asterisks than your typical Bethesda game. This game had one of the shortest development times out of any of the main Fallout games. For comparison's sakes, Fallout 3 had a development year of 4 years, while Fallout New Vegas only had 18 months. Couple that with the fact that they had a strict deadline, it's a miracle that the game came out as amazing as it did. But the launch of this game was rough to say the least. I have never seen a game so broken at launch, and it honestly made me dislike this game for a very long time. Back when I was little, I rented this game from my local Redbox back when that was a thing, and I remember playing this game non-stop. And while I didn't exactly care too much about bugs as a kid, the thing that made me despise this game was the fact that during one of my playthroughs, the game corrupted, and when I rebooted the game, my save file was completely wiped. So I gave up on playing the game and did not pick it up again until much later. This was not an outlier, as many people have talked about how this game's release was absolutely abysmal. The game would constantly crash, companions would just disappear. For PC players, some couldn't even launch the game. There was this terrifying intro.
You've been out cold a couple of days now.
And apparently the PS3 version of the game was so poorly optimized that the game would constantly lag and crash for whenever you played for more than 4 hours at a time. Or one of my personal favorites, infinite loading times. Basically, whenever you try to load into the next zone, you never know if you were A, load into the next zone, B, crashing, or C, be stuck at the loading screen. And if you didn't save beforehand, well, tough shit. So while Fallout 76 launch was a dumpster fire, New Vegas was somehow even worse, but I hardly hear anybody talk about it nowadays. I think it stems from the fact that the game has mostly been fixed. The developers were very transparent with the community and worked hard to get the game back on a working state. And it paid off since most of the glaring issues were fixed up as the game continued to be patched. It didn't mean that everything was solved overnight, but the openness with the developers, along with the support of the game, made people finally respect the game for what it was. Some even considered this to be the best of the series, and you wouldn't think that when it was initially released. This game was hyped up like there was no tomorrow. For some context, CD Projekt Red was the gaming community's darling, hyping up their games as the best of all time. Mostly due to the reputation they had built for truly making some of the most quality games like The Witcher 3 and... So when they announced the new game, gamers truly ate it up. It was going to be everything gamers ever dreamed of. A cyberpunk aesthetic full to the brim with atmosphere and personality. A story so complex you'll have to play it more than once. A fun and diverse combat system. Deck customization, and Keanu Reeves.
Is really going to be breathtaking. You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking.
This game could truly do no wrong. Anytime they showed it off at E3, it constantly stole headlines, and many stated that this game was going to be another CD Projekt Red classic. But as the game continued to be worked on, it got delayed, then delayed again, and again. This became somewhat of a running joke, with many now parodying the infamous yellow text box when the game was announced to be delayed. People were supportive of the developer's choice to delay the game to make sure that it came out as amazing as possible. But with each new delay, more features seemed to be cut from the game, such as multiplayer and wall running. And soon, more and more began to grow impatient, some even going as far as to threaten the employees to release the game faster. Not only that, but stories began to leak that the developers were put into serious crunch time. Crunch being an in-industry term used to describe employees being overworked in order to get a project done before a deadline. This was rightfully seen by many as workplace abuse, since crunch culture is often associated with a lot of negative stigma due to how it can cause high amounts of stress and mental exhaustion for people who are put through it. This whole subject warrants its own video, and luckily, Noodle made an in-depth explanation on just how toxic this type of practice can really be and how prevalent it actually is. You guys should definitely check it out. But basically, this game started to gain a bit of a bad reputation before it even came out. But it didn't stop the hype train. In fact, it kept building up until the day of release, when it finally hit a wall. This game was absolutely not ready to be released, and people finally realized why it kept getting delayed in the first place. It was a buggy disaster. Viral videos were shared all over social media about how poor the performance of the game was. Many not even being able to play it on last-gen consoles. These problems were amplified and downright unplayable. The game was so broken that the PlayStation Store even took it down from its digital store, which is unheard of since Sony never takes down even the worst games on its platform. Absolutely nothing went right with the release, and many disavowed CD Projekt Red for releasing a game in such a state. Many began to look back to see what exactly went wrong. And soon, news stories began to crop up that the game didn't even properly start production until 2016, despite being announced way back in 2012. The development was apparently a chaotic mess. It turns out, having to develop a massive immersive world is a lot more difficult than developing a much more simplistic game like The Witcher. Now, I want to stress that a lot of these decisions were not made by the developers, but rather by higher-ups who only wanted to release the game so they could finally profit. Chances are the devs knew that the game was unfinished, and probably would have delayed the game further, but with executives refusing to budge on the release date, the game was finally released. Still, they did come out and apologize for basically releasing an unfinished game, and promised that they would put their full efforts into fixing it, even if it did take 2 years to get the game at a stable rate. Despite this, the game did gain a bit of a cult following, and even in its unfinished state, the game did have a lot to offer, like a truly immersive world, full to the brim with content and a complex story. When you could get it to work, that is. And as the years have gone by, the developers have seemed to gain more good faith from the community, as they put their efforts into fixing the game. In fact, after the release of the Edgerunners anime, and the promise of more content to come, I would say that Cyberpunk has a seemingly bright future ahead of itself. Halo is one of the most legendary game series of all time. It was truly a cultural milestone, revolutionizing first-person shooters on consoles, having an amazing story, a downright masterpiece of a soundtrack, and an extremely fun multiplayer to boot. This game series could do no wrong. Until Bungie stopped working on the series and Microsoft proceeded to drive Halo off a cliff. Microsoft formed 343 Studios to continue to work on the Halo franchise, but due to a multitude of factors, the games developed by them have not been the most well received by fans, causing the Halo franchise as a whole to plummet in popularity, mostly thanks to the negative reputation the 343 games have caused. The first 2 games made by them were divisive to say the least, and many began to doubt that they would ever live up to Bungie. So 343 promised to kick themselves into high gear with the next mainline entry in the series, Halo 5, as well as porting over all previous games in the series and remastering Halo 2 in the Master Chief Collection. The game promised to have all the games be readily available on the Xbox One, as well as allow the games to run at a crisp 60 FPS with an upscaled restoration for all the games, which was gamer certified, TM. Not only that, but you could also play every iteration of the multiplayer, which was a really novel idea at the time, since the original servers for the first 2 Halo games have long since been shut down, so bringing them back was truly promising. And once the collection was finally released, it didn't work. Like, at all. The collection had a multitude of issues, such as crashing, not properly tracking your progress when playing any of the campaigns, crashing, having multiple bugs and glitches occur, crashing, co-op not working at all, crashing, leaving you stuck in the loading screen whenever you try to launch the multiplayer, crashing, being stuck in the menus when you looked at it wrong, crashing, and more crashing. The games were extremely rough to say the least. I remember being one of those unlucky people who bought the collection on release and being absolutely devastated at the quality of the games. I was initially determined to get every achievement and play the games to death, but was so disappointed about the launch of this game that I just stopped playing it altogether, which I'm sure was a very common sentiment among those who bought the collection on day one. 343 did come out and apologize for the state of the game and promised to fix most of the issues, as well as porting over Halo LDST to people who bought it early. Oh, thanks, you shouldn't have. And while the game was continuously patched to try and address most issues, it seemed that more and more would crop up in their place. So no matter how many times this game was updated, it seemed to get worse. So 343 started to slowly stop updating the game. Many thought that the collection was going to be abandoned since as the years went by, 343 and Microsoft seemed to stop acknowledging this game's existence. Luckily, the collection did have a second chance at life once the game suddenly began to be updated again, with the promise that the collection was finally going to be fixed. But best of all, the game series was promised to be ported over to PC, which got a few fans excited. So while the game series was a true disaster on release, I'm glad that at least 343 is finally taking the time to give the series the respect it deserves. Pokemon is a franchise that really gets away by doing the absolute bare minimum when releasing a new generation of games. For the longest time, the series used the same formula for almost all of its games. making most of them feel like they lacked innovation or reason to exist at all. And while it was mostly forgiven back in the day, it has been something that a lot of fans began to harshly criticize once Sword and Shield released, since those games really felt like over-glorified 3DS games. So when the announcement of a new generation coming, as well as giving a promising look as to what the franchise will look like with Legends Arceus, who cares? Many people began to feel excited about the new and bold direction that Pokemon could be heading in. It really did feel like Game Freak was finally listening and finally going to deliver a game that fans and newcomers were going to love. And when Pokemon Scarlet and Violet released, many people instantly noticed just how terrible the performance for the games were. The game had so many issues, chief among them being that they did not run well at all, having constant frame rate issues and lag, as well as looking like a PS2 game and sometimes even a PS1 game. It didn't help that these games seem to also be some of the most noticeably buggy and glitchy games, not just in the franchise, but for a major release. The state of the game was so bad that Nintendo even publicly addressed it and apologized to fans for the current state of the games. Nintendo, a company famous for never addressing any of the problems the community has with it, had to promise the people that the games would be fixed. These games were really f***ed up. Oh, okay, I can destroy him. Why did I sink to the floor? This game was the reason I wanted to make this video, because when I played it on release, it gave me such a poor impression that I almost stopped playing it entirely. Of course, I then went on to complete the game because I'm a shill for this franchise, but it doesn't excuse its absolute horrendous state that it's still in, as of the writing of this video. One of the main theories of its poor performance is because the Switch isn't as powerful, but other games not only look better, but run way smoother on the Switch. The truth of the matter is that the game just needed more time to develop. I'm still surprised that Legends Arceus wasn't supported further, since it could have tied fans over, but nope, they just tossed the game aside in favor of this mess. And the most messed up part about all of this is that the game was still favorably seen by most fans. I saw so much discourse that although this game ran like a potato, this was the most fun they had with a Pokemon game in a long time, and I honestly don't blame them. The games, broken as they are, have found a way to make the franchise feel fresh again. Hopefully this game gets patched soon and this doesn't happen again in the franchise, but something tells me that this will only happen more, since the game is now one of the most successful launches in Pokemon history. The state of video game releases has been a bit depressing. The fact that most people expect the game to be broken on release really feels like the industry as a whole will never grow out of this. Since patches are something that is readily available to fix any issues during a game's release, with day one patches now almost being a standard, many are willing to forgive a game's brokenness with the promise of fixing it later. It's almost the same attitude people give to games that release with no content. I didn't even cover everything since there are just so many games that release like this, there are that many. Something I want to stress is that a game being launched like this isn't always the fault of the developers, since most of the time, they know if their game is ready to release or not, but they don't usually have control of when a game gets released, resulting in the problems we have now. Couple that with the fact that they're also crunched to get these games released really makes it that much more understanding. Still, it isn't all doom and gloom, since most of these games do overcome their hurdles and come out greater than they were when they first released. Hopefully this is something that will happen less over time, as working conditions get better and having more realistic deadlines. And who knows, maybe even one day, even Bethesda will learn how to launch a game that works too.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.